Hello, hello. Welcome to Grieving Voices. My guest today is Christina Keyes. She went from a career woman to caregiver when her mother had a life-changing stroke in 2013. She cared for her for 10 years. Turning a mess into a message, she is now a national speaker and advocate, as well as the founder and CEO of Keys for Caregiving, where she is connecting businesses and family caregivers to collectively transform the care space community and amplify voices for change. Thank you so much for being my guest. And I've actually heard more of the caregiving having a voice, just in local in news in my state, legislature, things like that. We'll get to that, what your mission really is and what you've been doing to push that mission and all of that. But let's talk first about what brought you to my podcast today, and that you talked about briefly in your bio about your mother. And what I've discovered is that there's a lot more under the surface, like always. And
Yeah.
so um, I'll let you take the reins and share your story.
Well, I was, like you mentioned, a career woman. And then 2013, I got the call that my mother had fallen and had a stroke and she wasn't expected to live. And I walked into that hospital and I didn't know if I was going to walk out with a mother or if I was going to have to walk out making funeral arrangements. They gave her 1% chance to live. And we wound up having 10 years together. Me as her caregiver. I had no idea how to be a caregiver. It was constantly, is this going to be the day? And I lived in this state of fear. After you walk in and see somebody, on life support and them telling you, like, there's 1% chance to live, and you don't know at any minute if she's going to live. I mean, I think the first 3 years, when she did survive the first 3 years, I had this weird like PTSD that like I'd get off the phone with somebody and think, oh my God, that's the last time I'm going to talk with them. And my boyfriend would go in the bathroom and he was in there for more than 20 minutes. I'd be like, oh my God, did he die? I mean, I was so afraid people were going to die at that point. And I really had been blessed in my life that I hadn't had a lot of people die, and, taking care of my mother, there was a lot of, she's almost going to die. And there was just this pressure of if I didn't do things right, she could die, and not being able to sleep at night. And, we lived in separate places. I lived like 7 minutes away from her, but there was cameras at her house. And so I don't know how many times a night I would wake up and check the cameras and just watch to see if she was breathing. And, I had caregivers go in, during the day while I was working, and the times that they would check in, you know, 10 o'clock would be the time that what call am I going to get? Like mom's okay or mom's dead, and we had so many end of life talks. And I think as a caregiver, what was hard about that was, I'd have to be present for her and allow her the space to talk about that. And there was this church down the street from my mom's house, and I would be there for her and I would let her say whatever she needed to say. I would let her ask whatever questions she needed to ask. I was, not only a daughter that was there for her, I was a friend that was there for her. I was a woman that was there for her. And I was strong for her. And then I would leave and I would go to that church and I would be a daughter, you know, and break down. And it was hard to be that strong, and even though I knew that day was coming, even though I knew that day was coming when, when she finally went on hospice, it had been a crazy year, at 2022, my father, who I was not a caregiver for, he passed away April 30th in 2022. He had been in the hospital, but we weren't expecting him to pass away. And then May 5th, my cousin, who I was really close to, died unexpectedly. We called him. We knew he had cancer. We called him to let him know my father had passed. And we knew that he was getting ready to go on hospice, but he had talked about, he thought he was going to be on a long hospice journey. Well, he died 5 days later. And then May 9th, my boyfriend of 17 years, who we broke up in 2019, he had had a stroke, 5 months later. I became his caregiver and I was caring for him and mom at the same time. Well, he had another stroke, wound up in the hospital, and made it so he needed full-time care. And so that year, I'm grieving my father, I'm grieving my cousin, I'm going to the funeral and my father in California. I'm working and I'm getting everything taken care of for my ex-partner Terry, to go into adult family home. I am taking and shutting down our house that we had lived in for 17 years because he did a Medicaid spin down, and that was being turned over to the state. And then as this is going on, my mother is getting sicker. And then November, Thanksgiving, my birthday, my mother went from being paralyzed on one side to being paralyzed on both sides. And for no reason, we didn't know why. She'd been declining. And I said, Mom, let's go to the hospital one last time and see if there's anything they can do. And what the doctor at the hospital said to me, Christina, your mother is actively dying, and it's time for her to go on hospice. And so we celebrated our last Thanksgiving together in that hospital. And we had our last prayer with the chaplain who had prayed with us 100 times over so many visits in that hospital. And I brought mom home and did that hospice journey with her. So,
And it was COVID.
no, 2022
Oh,
with COVID,
2022.
COVID had passed. So we survived COVID. It was crazy. Neither one of us got COVID during that.
Wow.
We were so diligent, we were so diligent about it all. And I got COVID after my mother passed, so it wasn't even during COVID, but yeah, no, it was not during COVID. So yeah. So that was interesting. And the hospice journey was, very interesting. The hospice journey, I work in the care industry. I speak all over. I've had a million end of life talks. I work with end of life doulas. I go to death cafes. I death is normal part of caregiving. If you're in caregiving, there's death that comes along with that, right? And so I thought like I was prepared, like logically I knew. I brought in the hospice team. We'd had a million end of life talks. My end of life doula was there. I did all the right things. And, you know, it doesn't matter if you are the head of hospice and you've watched a million people die and you lecture all over the United States about hospice and dying and the end of life process. Until you watch your mother, your father, your child, your husband, your wife die, you don't understand um, how different it's going to be from what you will realize that there were so many things that you didn't know what you were talking about, because it's a different experience when it's you. And and it was hard. And I remember even things like I had been doing my mom's meds for 10 years, managing her meds for 10 years, but when it came time to give her those comfort meds, even that was, it literally turned my stomach to do that because I knew what those comfort meds were for, you know. And when I knew she was going to pass in that last week, the last week, I was supposed to up her comfort meds and I didn't want to. I thought somehow, I would get out of giving her the dose that would, make
Mhm.
her relax enough. Logically, I knew that wasn't possible. And I kept calling the hospice nurse and friends and family and be like, are you sure I should give her more? And everybody kept saying, yes, the doctors, the hospice, everybody said yes. And I gave her that first one that night, the extra first one, and then I waited and she didn't pass, and I was like, okay, maybe it's okay. And then the second night, you know, I gave her that second one, and I waited and she didn't pass, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna just go upstairs and take a little nap because I wasn't showering, I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't because if you shower, like like at any minute she could die. You know what I mean? And you don't want to miss that, right? And then the caregiver came in because I had hired care, extra care because I wanted to be a daughter during that time. I didn't want to be just a caregiver. And I said, well, let me check on mom. And I went in and I remember I'd asked the doula and the hospice team, what do I do when they die? And they said, well, some people stay with the body and some people, and I was like, oh no, I'm not doing that, and I went in there and my mother had passed. And I came out and I told the caregiver, I said, call the hospice team. My mother's passed. I said, please give me some time alone with her. And I stayed in there. And when the hospice team came in and they got her cleaned up and they wheeled her out and I asked for a minute alone with her to say a prayer and, um, thank you for the journey we had together, you know. And I did everything right. There was no money. There was no money. There was nothing. My mom had all these wishes we had talked about. And everybody said, she won't know. Just cremate her, just cremate her. I will know. I'm her daughter. And so I gave her everything she wanted. And I did all the things. And thank God that when my father died, I had gone through grief counseling. I had an amazing grief counselor. I'd done group counseling, I'd done art therapy counseling, all of this stuff. And so when my mother passed, I realized there was a huge difference between grief and caregiver recovery. A huge difference. And one of the things that I was very blessed about in my grief journey was because it's so confusing and people say things to you like, but your mom's in a better place now. And I gotta say, never say that to anybody because you're standing in front of somebody and you're basically saying you don't matter. We know that person is in a better place. I asked God a million times. I don't understand why you're letting my mother suffer, and I'm glad that she's in a beautiful place. But I'm here on earth, and you're standing in front of me telling me that I don't matter by saying, your mother's in a better place. She is. I am dying inside. I would do anything to hear her voice one more time, you know? That is not a compassionate thing to say to anybody. How are you? Is a compassionate thing. Can I give you a hug? Is there anything you need? Is a compassionate thing to say to somebody. I was really blessed because I I met a woman a week after my mother, shortly after my mother passed, whose husband had passed. And we, whose husband passed a week after my mom. And we didn't know each other. And I had shared about my mother passing in this fellowship meeting I'm part of. And she came up to me afterwards and said, my husband recently passed. I'm going through the same thing. And we became best friends. And I got to tell you, if you're walking through a grief journey, that is such a beautiful blessing if you have somebody who understands, because we could be together and, you know, in a matter of like, 2 hours of being together, we could laugh, we could cry, we could, go on a rant, we could do all, and it didn't need to have any rhyme or reason. I remember we were shopping one day and we were at a thrift store trying to, retail therapy the deaths away, and there was a song that came on, and we both started dancing in the thrift store, and we started laughing. And then we both started crying in the thrift store because I think it was the first time we had both laughed since the death, you know? And and that's the type of friend that I feel so blessed to have because we got it. And everybody else, you know, they want you to be okay because it makes them very uncomfortable when you're not. You know, I share very openly about my grief journey on social media. Share very openly about my caregiver recovery journey, my caregiver journey on social media. My grief journey is the one that people try to fix me about. People try to, I don't need to be fixed. I need to walk through this. This is a process. You know, grief, there is no end date to grief. You know, there is no actual phases to grief. You learn how to walk with grief, you know, and you learn how to incorporate it into your life, you know, and that's okay, you know, because I feel like with grief, I get to experience grief because I love my mother so much, and I love my father so much, and I love Terry so much, and Terry and my cousin, and Terry isn't even gone, you know?
It's a lot of loss. And I appreciate you sharing as openly as you did about the things that were helpful and unhelpful, things that supported you along the way, and all of that. And to your point about people saying they're in a better place, it's the reason from my perspective as a grief coach, I would say that's because as a griever, you want that person to be there with you. They're not in a better place because you want them there here with you.
Mhm.
And then also you said, you were talking about, oh, what was it? Maybe it'll come back to me, but I'm curious, what did you learn about end of life that maybe surprised you in this process? I'm a trained end of life doula too, and watched my father essentially
Mhm.
die in front of me when I was a child. Um, what did you learn about yourself and what surprised you about end of life? Because I can share what surprised me. But I'm curious what you learned in that process.
You know, it was a lot of moments of being a 50-something-year-old woman and an 8-year-old child who didn't want her mommy to die all at the same time. You know, it was having to be strong and scared and heartbroken out of your mind, like having to be extremely strong, but also being extremely scared and heartbroken at the same time and having to function at that, you know, having to function at that. And I just, I also learned that it's okay to take a step away from people because I I never knew what emotion was going to come out, you know. Like I remember when my dad went on hospice, and I went to the grocery store. We were going to get some food, and me and my brother and sister were just going to hunker down. And because my father was in California, we were up here in Washington, and the clerk said, "How are you?" And I just looked at her, you know, and it's like, you know, I didn't know how to answer, you know, and then I was angry that I had to make something up, you know, and uh I just found out that limiting my interactions with people were much easier for me to experience a little bit more peace because I needed people, but I didn't. And I also learned that in the end of life process, miracles come in weird ways from weird people, you know, from weird outlets. I had a beautiful experience Christmas Day. Everybody tends to sort of, when death is happening, people are scarce. You know, it makes them uncomfortable, especially at Christmas. You know, Christmas Day, there was no decorations, there was no presents, there was no music, there was, Nothing. Mom was in an end of life coma. She had been in an end of life coma. She hadn't talked or sat up or opened her eyes in a week. Um, I was sitting on the couch. I don't know how many days it had been since I showered, and I was literally just begging God. I had wanted to change my mother's adult brief. She was dead weight because she was in an end of life coma. She was not a big woman, she was a thin woman, but I couldn't do one person, change. And none of the hospice people were willing to come out unless it was an absolute emergency.
Mm.
And none of the caregivers were working. So I'm sitting on the couch and I'm like begging God for my Christmas miracle to be. I just wanted somebody to come help me change my mom's adult grief. That's all I wanted for Christmas was to give my mother some dignity, and I'm crying to God, and I get this message on Facebook from this woman that I was acquaintances with her, and she had donated some stuff to my nonprofit, and we had talked. She had donated like a month before. Her mother had just died. My mother had just gone on hospice, and she was donating some stuff to my nonprofit. We went, we talked, gave each other a hug. We didn't even have each other's phone number. We were just connected on Facebook, right? So, of all people, Christmas Day, she messages me and says, "How are you doing?" Because I'm like not engaging because I don't want to see everybody's Christmas. I'm like, I don't want to talk about Christmas. I'm angry that this is my Christmas, that I just want to change my mind. Like, that is the only thing I want for Christmas, you know? And of all people, she messages me, like, "How are you doing?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm fine. And, and somehow I said, I'm just trying to figure out how to change my mom's, diaper. 'Cause that's what my mother called it. So anybody out there who's upset, I'm calling it a diaper. My mother called it that, right? And and she says, "Well, I can come over and help." And I'm like, "Oh God, no, I would never, even my best friend, right? And she's like, "No, no, I can do it." And she had family that had flown in, people at her house. And she's like, do you have anything for Christmas dinner?" I'm thinking like, you know, no, you know, and she says, "Please let me come over and bring you some food and help you." And I'm like mortified, right? But I'm like, okay, because it was the only way. Nobody else. I had called hospice a million times, they weren't coming out. So Vivian comes over, and she brings me some food, and then she goes into the bedroom with me with my ma, and she now my mother hated when new people were there, right? She hated new people being there. And so Vivian's at the end of the bed, and even though my mother hadn't talked or opened her eyes in a week, I said, "Mom, this is Vivian. She's here to help me get you cleaned up, and she's going to help me." I was talking to her even though she wasn't talking. So we clean up my mom. We get her all covered up, say, "I love you." And then me and Vivian, we go into the kitchen, which my mom was kind of hard of hearing anyways, right? We go into the kitchen, we're standing in the kitchen, and for some reason we're whispering. And Vivian tells me that she had had a dream the night before that her mother had come to her in the dream, and her mother was saying, "Baby girl, everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay." And all of a sudden, literally out of nowhere, I hear my mother going, "Mom, mom, mom." And my mom, when she was sick, she used to call me mom. And so we've got go running because mom hasn't talked or opened her eyes in a week. We go running in there. I go to the side of the bed. I grab her hand. Vivian's at the end of the bed. Now my mom doesn't know who Vivian is. And I grab my mom's hand. I'm like, "What is it, Mom? What is it?" And she sits straight up and she looks right at Vivian, who she's never met before. And she says, "Baby girl, everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay." And she laid back down and she closed her eyes, and she never talked again. And then me and Vivian stood there for a second, and we went into the kitchen and we cried, and we understood that we both needed a Christmas miracle. I needed somebody to help change my mom's brief. I needed to give my mother the gift of dignity. She needed the gift of hearing from her mother. And even though we didn't know each other, somehow my mom was almost there and her mom was there, and they made that happen. And so weird gifts happen, during hospice. And it was the most messed up but beautiful miracle ever, and I'm so grateful for that Christmas miracle on hospice. So She died, my mother died on the 28th, so she died, what, 2.5 days later? And she never opened her eyes or talked again, you know. But we did a lot of beautiful things on hospice, like I asked my mom, I said, Ma, um, I said, after you die, everybody's going to give me flowers and cards, and they're going to come tell me all these nice things about you. I said, I don't need any of that, but I'd love for you to experience that now. For you to get the flowers and you to get the cards and for you to hear all the nice things about you. Would it be okay if I let people know that you're on hospice and we are going to celebrate your life now? And she said yes. And so we did that, and cards started coming in and calls started coming in, flowers started coming in, and she would get on the phone with people and they would talk about memories from when she was a kid, and there was video calls, and you know I was so grateful we did that. And my mom didn't have to leave wondering, who loved her, and we had, my brother and sister was not very involved in the caregiving process. As a matter of fact, it caused a lot of stress for us because they were not very involved. But during my dad's dying and my mother's dying, they were absolutely beautiful, and at one point at the beginning when she first went on hospice, they came down, they brought all the kids. My sister had 5 people in her 4 people in her family. My brother had 5 people in her family, and there was me. We put beds all over the house, mattresses all over the house. And I had the end of life doula come in. I sat her down. She sat the whole family down and answered all kinds of questions, from the little children, the 10-year-olds, to the 50-year-olds, like what happens, if Nana dies, what do we say to Nana? How do we say goodbye? Like all the really uncomfortable questions she answered in a way that a 10-year-old could understand and a 50-year-old who was grieving could understand. And we had big prayer circles with all of us in that room with my mother, and each one of those children, her grandchildren or her children, like had a moment to say whatever they needed to say while she was able to talk and she knew she was dying. And they never had to wonder, like, did Nana love me? Did I say enough? They had that all before, and we were so blessed to be able to have that with my father. you know I was told he was going on hospice. I was given a minute and a half to say something to him over Zoom, while his wife, who we did not have a good relationship with, was in the room. I got to say, I love you so much. There's going to be a lot of banana pudding in heaven, Dad. I love you. I promise to take care of the kids. And that was all I got to say to my father. That was it, and we had gone to see my dad the week before, and but he didn't want to talk about him dying. He wanted to just have a visit, and we didn't know he was going to die. He was getting ready to go into have another surgery, and maybe he was going to get better. We had no clue. So I learned on hospice that one, there are a lot of emotions that come up. Two, you know, I'll just be really honest here. I'm 31 years sober, and I've been in recovery for a long time, very active in the recovery community. I speak all over about drug addiction and alcoholism. And I used to get so angry hearing about people who would steal hospice drugs, from people, right? And I remember calling my sponsor and saying, I probably owe a lot of people amends because I'm 30 years sober. And I am grateful I have 30 years sober, because honestly, if I had 10 years sober or 20 years sober, I don't know if I'd be able to do this sober. I mean, it is knowing what those meds are designed to do, make them comfortable enough to let their body relax enough to die. And that I thought that hospice was going to give them to them. I didn't know that I would be the one that would give to them. And then when my mother couldn't swallow them anymore, having to crush them up and put them in her cheek. And oh my God, it was traumatic, you know. So it is it is I was grateful I was the one who was there with my mom. I wouldn't have, no matter how hard it was, I would have done it. I would do it again and again and again, right? But it's traumatic standing by somebody's side, helping them die.
And you explained yet how beautiful it can be too.
Oh, absolutely. I even when I walked in and found my mother's body just laying next to her, I didn't know if I was crying because she was dead or crying because it was finally over for her. All of that pain she had been in, and being able to say that prayer for her that last time in the body bag that she was going to leave the house. And I remember I worked my butt off to give her the funeral that she wanted. And we had a viewing of just the family. And I had picked out a beautiful dress for her and a beautiful crown and a pink casket that said mother on it. And she loved American Girl dolls. And I buried her with an American Girl doll and an angel outfit. And I remember walking into that room and seeing her. She looked more beautiful than I'd ever seen her. She looked so peaceful, like she was going to the most important date of her life. She was going home. She was going to be with my father and God and all the other people who had passed, and she looked so beautiful for that occasion.
Making me cry. It's absolutely okay. My heart just broke for you when you were describing your Christmas wish. What a gift you received.
Yeah, it was, and me and Vivian, I swear it's like we both got the best Christmas gift. We both got the best Christmas gift ever. And hummingbirds are both of our ways to connect with our mom. And so we share whenever we have a hummingbird, experience. She's moved to another state now, and I will always be forever bonded with her for that moment when all of my best friends were nowhere to be found. There was Vivian, you know. So
I've had personal experiences where the people you least expect come out of the woodwork,
yeah.
and the ones that you thought you could lean on fade in the background.
Well, like
Um,
with my friend Kate, who I met, she's out of the blue was a blessing. My other close friends really couldn't. I mean, there was a lot of grief, between Terry, my dad, my cousin, my ma, the built up grief, over all of these years. I was not a very pleasant person to be around, you know what I mean? And I didn't have a lot to talk about. I mean, everything was reminded me of somebody. Everything was death, and my best friend Kate, who was walking through the same thing, we were able to have real conversations about the things that come along with grieving, those moments of like, I would like to die, you don't want to die, and I was so blessed that I'm so blessed. It was such a weird blessing to have my father die first because I experienced those moments of like I would like to die because the pain was so great, right? And so I think if I would have experienced that with my mom for the first time, combined with the caregiver piece of it, I wouldn't have realized that was just a part of grieving, and me and Kate always talk about, like, some of those days it's kind of like doing laundry. You have to, like, get the laundry gets dirty, you put it in the washer, then you put it in the dryer, then you got to fold it, and the thoughts of, like, I would like to die, or sometimes the stuff's just in the laundry, because you might just be having a bad day. It's really just, I would like to just not feel this, and I miss them so much. And it's like, how long is this load of laundry going to take? Like, how long am I going to miss them? But soon it's going to get better, because they're going to get dry, and you wear the clothes again and you're smiling again. And we talk about that a lot. And my other friends who haven't experienced that, you know and I get it. I have compassion for them, because how many times before my father died did I see somebody, whose father or mother or somebody died, and it's like, sorry for your loss. You comment on Facebook, and then or people would share about, people passing, and it'd be like 3 months past that, and you'd be like, wow, are they still going through that? You don't know until you know, and that, I think that's part of the reason why, I share so much, not because, um, you know, somebody said, well, you just want attention. Well, yeah, here's who I want attention from. I want attention from the people who are also grieving, so they know that they're not alone. So when they don't have anybody else to flip and call, they know to call me. And I'll tell you what, when I have a caregiver that I've met across the United States, that one of their first calls after their family, I can't tell you how many of them I am their first flippin' call. And it is an honor to get that call. One of the first after their family, I'm one of the first messages before it goes out publicly. Because they know that I understand, and I've been there, and I will be there for them. It, and that's an honor for me to be able to do that. I don't want anybody to feel alone, because if I would have felt completely alone, you know, I maybe it wouldn't have just been a thought. Maybe it wouldn't have just been a thought. And I think they're in the grief classes I've been to, the grief groups I've been to, that thought of I would like to die comes up a lot for a lot of grievers. And so, yeah, I want the attention of people who are walking through this, who are gonna walk through it, because we cannot pretend that we just get better 2 months later, and we got to act like everything's okay. We got to learn how to walk hand in hand with grief.
I remember the point that I was trying to come up with before that you mentioned. You found connection with someone, with Vivian, who didn't
Yeah,
even have the same loss as you. And I
yeah,
just want to point out to people that, you can kind of put yourself in a box sometimes of support that's available to you by just thinking like, well, I need to go to this specific group because they had this same loss as me. They're going to understand my specific loss. No one's going to understand your specific loss, no matter what group you're in, because your relationship is unique. So
yeah,
just forget about that, right? It's where is the support from someone grieving?
right.
Because that's the thing that unifies us all. That's the thing we all experience is the grief itself. And by having someone who's open to feeling their grief, I
Hmm.
think that's where the support is. It's not someone who is doing everything they possibly can to run away and avoid it,
Right.
which is normal and
Yeah.
natural for a
I love
time,
that.
right? It is normal and natural to do that. Um, but to find someone that you can connect with, regardless of their loss, that's what can help you get out of that desire and propensity to ignore it.
Right,
Because if you have someone who's going first, who's
right.
sharing first, that's all that's needed. It's like, there's this commercial. This is a really bad example, but it's a perfect example. And I don't know why it came to my mind, but there's this commercial about, teenagers, and they're having school pictures taken. And this girl has braces and she doesn't want to smile. And this other girl goes up and she has braces, but she has the biggest smile. It gives this other girl permission. Oh, you know what? It's not so bad. I'm going to show my smile, even though I have braces, right? It's that person who's going first. And that's what I would say. And that's what you did. It's like, look for that person who's going first that you can connect with in your grief. And that's where you feel less alone and isolated, because not finding that's why it is so isolating, right?
Right. Well, and uh, it allows people to have that space to be who they need to be in that
Mhm.
process. And I talk about this a lot with my friends, you cannot, the more you resist what you're going through, the more it's going to weigh heavy on you. If
And
you allow
persist.
yourself to, yeah, yeah, if you allow yourself to just, you know, feel it, talk about it, it just is what it is. You're going to get through, you're going to get through it better. It's going to become easier when those thoughts come up. They don't get so dark, they don't get so loud because it's like they're just one of the leaves going down the stream. It's not the alligator in the stream, you know what I mean? That's trying to get you, So, we talk about that a lot, and I believe people need that space to, um, if they're having a bad day, to like, they need a space, a friend, a group to share about that. And you're absolutely correct. The relationships being different. I think one of the most wonderful things my grief coach said to me, my grief therapist said to me was, you and your brother and sister had the same exact father, but you're going to grieve differently because you had three different types of relationships with him.
Mhm.
And you're his children, and that's okay. You don't have to grieve the same way. You just don't have to. So,
And the energy it takes to get angry or upset that someone else is grieving differently than you is a lot of wasted energy. And that's where if people just understood that it's different for them because their relationship was different, even though you grew up in the same household, right? It's it's going to be very different. Um,
well, and the caregiver, piece of it too. There's a lot of people who are telling you to, get up and get active and do all this stuff. And it's like, okay, there is no timeline for grief, and you have been, as a caregiver, you've been in survival mode for so long. Like, your soul is tired from the grief, your heart is tired, from watching somebody slowly die, your heart is tired. It is okay for you to take your time, whatever timeline that is. If on Tuesday you have a crap ton of energy, great, go with it. But if on Wednesday and Thursday you cannot get out of bed, that's okay too. And nobody gets to tell you what your timeline is. There is no, and I talk about this a lot, there is no normal. You have to redefine your normal when you're grieving, because you have never been, your husband, your wife, your mother, your child has never died before, and you've had to live through that. So you need to redefine your normal. I cared for my mother for 10 years. I had to redefine my normal when I went from like living the high life and doing great and being, independent with my partner. And then all of a sudden I became a family caregiver. I had to redefine my normal. When my mother died, I had to redefine my normal also. We don't, it's okay to be a little mixed up. If you start comparing your life to how it was before they died, again, you're going to shame yourself and guilt yourself. Try to start recreating a life and redefining what your normal is, even though it's a sad thing to accept for a while, right? Now it's going to be different, but the more you start creating what that normal is, the more you can also experience some joy with that grief.
what was your relationship like with your mom before this happened, before her stroke, and with your father too?
Mm. Well, my mother was my abuser actually growing up a lot, and I didn't talk about a lot when she was alive. I didn't talk about that a lot. I went through a lot of therapy and things got better. We were, really close because I was able to set boundaries with her and things like that. And then she had her stroke, and the abuse started again, but not the physical abuse, right? But I couldn't set boundaries with her at that point because she had cognitive issues. So, setting boundaries with her is not going to work. And she needed medical attention, right? And so I had to learn how to set boundaries with myself. My relationship with my father, was, I love my father. My father taught me about unconditional love, and he was really proud of me, and He was the person I talked to my dad about a lot of stuff, He was the person I went to talk about when I was having a hard time. And I was kind of the person that he went to when he was having a hard time, for a long time too. And we had all these like, Sunday calls, and we would talk a lot. And I remember after my father died, I was so incredibly angry. I was so angry. I was so mad, and I couldn't connect with him. Because I had all these romantic ideas of what life after somebody died would be like. They'd be an angel, your guardian angel, you'd get all these signs, I thought, anyways, I couldn't feel my dad. I couldn't hear my dad. I couldn't connect with my dad. There was no signs. And I was so angry and so hurt. And I remember one day, it's probably about 3 months after he died, and I got myself a cup of coffee, and I had got a cup of coffee, poured a cup of coffee for him. I bought this cup for him that was a super dad cup because Father's Day was after he had passed, and I bought it for him, and I poured him a cup of coffee with some of his favorite creamer, and I went out into my backyard and I sat down and sat the cup by another chair that was out there because when he would come to visit, we would always have coffee together, right? And I'm in my backyard, and I thinking I'm just gonna talk to him. I'm just gonna talk to him. And at this time I smoked cigarettes, and so I lit a cigarette, and I said, "Well, Dad," uh, and I heard him clear as day say, "I don't like it when you smoke." And I said out loud, I said, "Well, I don't like it when you die, so I guess we're even." And I heard him laugh, and it was like at that point, like I started like the barrier was broken, and I could have these conversations with my dad and feel his presence, and hear his advice in my head when I was like talking to him. Like I still could have those conversations with him, and he still get that advice and still get that love, and that I used to have, but I had to have a minute of doing something crazy and that I felt stupid doing to just kind of let some of that air out of the balloon, and yeah, and my relationship with my mother, we had that tough relationship, but we had so many end of life conversations. My mother, you know, I'll tell you with my mom, she was my abuser, but my mother gave me a better life than she had, you know. And I had to learn. A lot of people used to ask me, how can you take care of your mother after what she did to you? And what they don't understand is I learned how to forgive my mother as a woman a long time ago before I forgave her as my mom.
Mm.
As I grew into a woman, I realized the challenges that come along with being a woman. I realized the challenges that come along with dating and being in love and being a career woman and all of these things. And if I would have had a best friend who went through what my mom went through, I would have said, "Man, you're doing a great job." You know what I mean? And I never allowed my mother to be a woman. I always wanted her to be the mom from the TV, the mom from the kids down the street. And so I was able to forgive my mother as a woman and then forgive her as my mom. And I remember it was a few months before she passed because my mother had never made amends to me. She had never said, "I'm sorry." And one day she said, "I'm sorry for everything that happened and for the things that I did to you." And I said, "Ma, I forgave you a long time ago. And that's how I was able to be your caregiver. You've got nothing to worry about. We are good." And when she was in hospice in those last few days before she stopped talking, she said again, "I'm so sorry." I said, "I want you to go in peace. I want you to know that we are good." And she was able to go knowing that. So,
One of the things that I work with grievers is forgiveness.
mhm.
And it's the hardest. It's one of the hardest.
Mhm.
Uh, Even in the case of abuse, right? Like, how can you possibly forgive an abuser?
Right.
But it is possible, and there are ways about it, even if you're not fully 100% there. We call it a stopover. It's like this, you speak the truth
Right.
of where you're at. Um, but the importance of forgiveness is it is for you. It's not for them.
Well, and I had to really, again, I had to redefine what forgiveness was, because I thought if I forgave my mother, that meant that all the abuse she did to me was okay. And it also gave her a right to continue doing that. Not only my mother, but everybody. If I forgave you, that meant that I handed you back the bat and you got to continue to beat me up with it. And I had to remember that, like, that's not the case with forgiveness. You're not saying that when I say I forgive you, and I don't need to necessarily say that to you, even. It doesn't mean that, like, hey, all the crap you did to me is okay. And by the way, you can continue to do that and I'll keep doing that. I had to really get that through my head, because for a long time, I thought that meant I forgive you. It's okay to keep doing that to me. That is not the case. That is not the case.
Condoning.
And
Yeah.
and what it did is it freed me from waiting for that apology from her.
Mhm.
The forgiveness, when I forgave my mother, not by telling her, but within me as a woman, it freed me from waiting for that apology from her. It freed me from when I laid my head down on the pillow at night, those thoughts that went through my head about, I wish you would do this. I wish you, like, it freed me from that control, that waiting for that apology, for her realizing her wrongs had over me. That's
Mhm.
what it did. And she was none the wiser. She didn't know what was going on. But me, I could sleep better at night. I could walk into my mother's house and see my mom, and I could have a mother. I could have a relationship with her. Because being a mother, being a child, that saying, like, that's a child only a mother can love, and living in the space in my head that my own mother didn't love me, was torture. So, and she wasn't gonna fix it. And
Mhm.
I needed to fix it. So being able to forgive her as a woman and being able to stand beside her as a woman was a huge freedom for me. And it allowed me to love myself a little bit more as well. Right. And I needed that, because if she doesn't even love me, you know what I mean? We got to grow up and be adults. Right. If I'm constantly, like, blaming everything and being held by that, I'm selling myself short on what I could experience in life, and it's not an easy process. Forgiveness is not an easy process. Um, and there's a lot of grief that goes along with it. You grieve that apology that you wanted. You grieve that moment of, like, them saying, God, I wish I wouldn't have hurt you. And you grieve, like, thinking if love would have just been enough to stop them from the abuse. Yeah, but we had, we were able to walk through that. And when I think about my life and I think about all the pieces of my life, I am so grateful, that my dad was an alcoholic. He would beat my mom and my mother would beat me. My dad never touched me, you know. When I think about my life, I'm grateful for all the pieces that were put together. And I'm grateful that those were my parents, because they also taught me a lot about love. They taught me a lot about fighting for my self esteem. They taught me a lot about speaking my voice. They taught me a lot about being a strong person and a strong woman and having a strong relationship with, my God and my faith, and has nothing to do with religion.
And the thought that came to my mind is, and yet people think that that what you share is to get attention.
Yeah. And I,
They just don't get it. And
yeah,
those are if anybody hearing this has experienced that, you have wisdom to share, and those aren't your people.
yeah. I mean, our voice matters. And if that's the way you want to see it, that somebody wants to see it, that I'm trying to do it, or you're trying to do it to get attention. Yeah, we're trying to get it to the people who we have walked through, and we don't want them to walk through it as alone as we had to. We are trying to turn a mess into a message and a test into a testimony. And that's why we are sharing.
I love that. I love that last piece that you just shared. Um, I'm just looking at my notes. I had some questions jotted down. I feel like you answered this, but I'll just ask it directly in case there's something that you want to add on to it. But what has your grief taught you?
Mm. Well, my grief has given me a stronger relationship with my faith. Um, my grief has taught me another level of redefining normal. My grief has taught me how to be stronger than I knew how to be. My grief has taught me that my story can have a different ending than my feelings tell me it can.
Are you the oldest?
I am.
Um, did your siblings experience the same abuse as you, or no?
Um, they did. It was a little different. Yeah. My brother went with my dad at 9, so but there was quite a bit for him before that, and my sister, yeah. So
Um, I'm just curious, how old were they when you divorced? Or how old were you when they divorced?
um, well,
Or maybe they didn't divorce. I
first
shouldn't.
or second time. So they got married.
Oh,
So they knew each other since my mom was 4. My dad was my mom's older brother's best friend. They got married. My mother was 15, my dad was 17. No, my dad was 17. They somehow got married. They had me when my mom was 17. And then they stayed married for like 19 or 20 years. They got divorced for a couple years, and then they got married again, had my sister when I was 13, and then stayed married for a couple years and got divorced again. So then my dad remarried somebody else in 2000. So yeah.
what? Okay, so you had mentioned that they taught you about love, and you had mentioned your long-term relationship was 17 years.
Yeah.
And um I guess I'll just wrap this in with forgiveness with your mother too. Like the role of forgiveness, not even just with our parental roles, right? But with other relationships and
Right.
forgiveness of yourself too,
Yeah.
because I'm curious where your addiction came into play at what point in your life.
Yeah, it was interesting because I remember my first boyfriend, I was like 15 years old, and we were never going to drink because addiction ran in our family, and then we broke up and we saw each other at a party on the beach and we were both drinking.
Mm.
Um, and then I quit drinking when I was 25. I got sober when I was 25, and I never picked up a drug or a drink again. I had done enough damage in that time. And I think the biggest damage for me was like I was always super tenacious, and I think I learned that from my mom. My mom went from Rosie the Riveter to she ended her career as an executive at Boeing with one of the highest military clearances you can get in aerospace, and very tenacious woman. And so I kept doing all these great things, and I'd get almost to the top, and then I would bail out of them, and I would move a lot, And I mean, I would buy my furniture based on if they fit in the trunk, and because we had moved around a lot when I was a child, and so I think I just got tired of it seemed like I had tried every person, place, thing, and job on the block. And, I kind of was at the place where I thought dying would be the best option. And I went to Bend, Oregon, where my cousin lived, and he was actually sober. And he asked me if I wanted to go to a meeting with him. And I hadn't figured out how to kill myself yet. And I went to a meeting with him and realized maybe that's the one house on the block I hadn't tried yet. And I wasn't going to commit to staying sober. And but I was going to do what they said and see if it worked, and not drink and use in between. And it worked. And I went from drinking and using quite a bit to being absolutely sober and not touching a drug or an alcohol. March 4th will be 31 years. So, yeah,
Congratulations.
yeah. So,
That's amazing.
yeah, I think
Despite
we're,
everything that you went through, and you touched on that, like how easy it would have been, and being the caregiver and having to dispense these meds and all of that, and having addiction in your past. That's an aspect I think of caregiving that isn't really talked about either.
yeah, and it happens a lot. And what was tough about it was, I talked about my father dying April 30th and my cousin dying May 5th. Well, the cousin that died May 5th is the cousin who got me sober. And that
Mm.
would have been the exact, person, he knew my mother, he knew the struggles with, addiction. That would have been the person who I would have called to be like, this is tough, Ray, and he was gone, and so, um, was talking to angels, again at that moment, I needed my dad, I needed my cousin, and I needed Terry, my partner, who was my best friend, for many years. But he had had his last stroke on May 9th, and we still have conversations, but he can't be there for me like he was before. Like all the people who are my ride or dies either had died or really, were incapacitated, and trying to go through this, and I was so grateful for, who I was really grateful for was some of those family caregivers, those private family caregivers had become family. And there was a woman named Jeanette, and she was almost like my ma, and she became like my mom's best friend. And she was the one who was there for me, who like, helped me administer some of those end of life meds when I was, having a hard time, when we had to start doing it different ways and just getting her to swallow the pills, I remember she did bring this little tiny tree, to the house, and that was the only Christmas thing we had there. And I had this absolutely gorgeous picture of, her giving my mom a hug and a kiss, a, a couple days before my mom went on that end of life coma. And she was the only person allowed in that viewing of the open casket. And she started as a caregiver we hired off of Facebook. And she became family that was so close that she was able to be in that viewing. And I love that woman today.
How have you rebuilt your life since 2022, which I'm sure is a year that you couldn't wait to flip the calendar on?
I rebuilt my life one moment at a time, 1 second at a time, one thought at a time, one prayer at a time, one new learning experience at a time. Um, I didn't know how to do any of this. I obviously did a lot of grief counseling. I learned, such an odd blessing that having my father die first, because I really learned the difference between grief and caregiver recovery, and I named it caregiver recovery because my recovery from drug and alcoholism, you rebuild your life, and that's what we're having to do. And so, um, simple things like before I was caring for my mom, I used to play on 3 softball teams, I belly danced, I went vacationing, all of these things, and I didn't have time to do I had to, like, make this little jar that had things in it that I could, like, pull out because I didn't even know what I wanted to try anymore, and my finances were an issue, and so, I don't I had to realize I don't know. I don't know how I feel, I don't know what I wanna do. I also had to realize that, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, getting comfortable with experiencing grief and joy at once. I remember I did my first 5K um, after my parents passed, and I'd done a 5K with my dad, and it was the 5K that I had done with my dad that was the first 5K. And so I brought a picture of him with me, and I brought, the little purse my mom used to use with me to carry my cell phone in. And I ended that night and I cried and I smiled, you know, and that's okay. And I realized there are no rules, there are no normal, and I get to make the rules. And I also get to remember, most importantly, that I have never lived through my mother dying before. I have never lived through my father dying before, or my cousin dying before, or my partner of 17 years having to be put in an adult family home. So it's okay for me to not have it all figured out. That's how I've got through it.
It's beautiful advice for those who may find themselves in similar shoes. I see on your website that you have a self care at sea cruise coming up.
Yes.
And that I found, I'm like, that's intriguing.
Yeah.
I want to give you an opportunity to share about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, this October on Norwegian, myself, Elizabeth Miller, Natalie Elliott, JJ Elliott, the Dementia Darling, and a bunch of other care influencers I believe there's 6 of us total. We are hosting a self care at sea cruise, and it's a 7-day cruise. And we are leaving out of Miami, and we're going to be doing all kinds of stuff on the ship and all kinds of excursions. And it's not just for people who are caregivers, it's people who want to learn how to redefine self-care, because our lives change. We're busy parents, we're grievers, we're professionals, we're all of these things. And we got to figure out how to do self-care. And so we're going to be on that boat, and we're going to learn how to normalize self-care, normalize thinking we're worth it, and we're all going to have a great time. And it's going to be people who are, trying to figure it all out together. And you're going to be learning about that through people who had to learn the hard way about self-care because they had to put themselves second while they were caring for a loved one. And they had to figure out real quick that they had to take care of themselves and their loved one at the same time. So it's going to be great. And what's great about it is, if you go to my website, you can book there, you can put $125 down, and then you don't even have to pay for the rest of it till the end of July. And the cruise leaves in October. In October is when it leaves. So, and it doesn't matter who you are, you're probably going to know quite a few people on that cruise. So
I love the idea. I think it's brilliant.
you should go with us. You should go. You should go.
And on that note, because I'm sure you've learned a lot about self care that you plan
Yeah.
to share on the cruise, but what would you share today on this podcast with people who are listening about self care? What you would have, what you would do, what you wish you would have done differently, which helps people to learn what to do, right? But it's not to tell people what to do either, right? It's what worked for you. And so, what would you speak to on self care for caregivers?
I would say the most important thing is your life changed. Your life is different from before care. Before care, I was doing mani-pedis, vacationing, doing all of these great things that I could afford, I had time for, and I could relax for. When I became a caregiver, that was not the case. So I had to redefine my normal and I had to take self-care and put it into 30-second acts, 5-minute acts, 10-minute acts. And then when my mother passed and I've been going through grief and caregiver recovery, I had to redefine my normal again and realized I was coming out of survival mode and a lot of trauma. And so I had to, what could I do for self care? I had a lot of decision fatigue going on. So, what can I do with that? I've actually, if anybody who follows me on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube or TikTok, I'm actually doing a series right now with some self-care cards where I'm taking the suggestions of these self-care cards and modifying them for a caregiver journey or a caregiver recovery journey because it is different. The biggest thing is redefine your normal and take it in. Self-care could be a 30-second act. I mean, if we all just stop for a minute right now, everybody listening, and just take a deep breath, we've just done an act of self-care right there.
Calms the nervous system. Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all that you have shared. I You clearly have a lot of wisdom to share. I'm not glad for you that this is what got you here, of course. But I don't know how you said it, but trauma into, how did you say that again?
Oh, using your voice is very important. Your voice has value. We are here to turn a mess into a message and a test into a testimony.
Test into a testimony. Yes, I love that. Yeah, that's your like a brand slogan.
Well, and I did
Um,
want to mention we do have a caregiver recovery peer-to-peer support group starting actually today, and it's a free monthly support group. So if there is anybody who is on a caregiver recovery journey, feel free to reach out to me on any of my social channels, or you can text me at my nationwide text line 360-230-7736. And we're going to help each other walk through that recovering as caregivers.
do you have a link for that caregiver group?
I do. I've got a flyer, and then they can also email caregiverrecovery@gmail.com. And that should be on my website shortly.
Okay. Uh,
It's all
and
over my social channels too, which is Christina Keyes or Keys for Caregiving on any of the socials.
and I will put the links in the show notes along with your text line.
Mhm. You can use that nationwide, so that gets
And
right.
that's just to connect with you, to ask questions
Yeah,
or
absolutely. Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for your time, Christina. This has been emotional. I've had some of my own awarenesses in hearing your story, so I thank you for that. And I have no doubts that your passion alone is going to take you to great places in this work. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on today, and thank you for everything you do. Thank you for giving us grievers a voice.
Absolutely. And remember, when you unleash your heart, you unleash your life. Much love.